What is up, YouTube? This is EvanMagician34 with another edition of Forgotten Fridays, and today we're going to take a look at Plasma, Team Plasma. They used to be a very big deal, but now they've kind of disappeared, and there are a number of reasons they have, but a number of the things that edge them out are now kind of gone. Like intimidating main Pyroar. You don't really see too much of him anymore. And even safeguarders are becoming somewhat scarce as megas are becoming more common, kind of rendering them useless in a lot of ways. And the tempo of the game has increased, but that doesn't mean Plasma can't keep up. So we're going to take an interesting look at what Plasma might just look like to go to your local, or maybe even a bigger tournament if you are indeed that gutsy. Alright, and one of the things that I think makes this definitively a Plasma deck, I mean, yes, fearsome Genesect is still out there, but I wouldn't call that necessarily a Plasma deck in the truest sense, although it does rely on Team Plasma cards. It's mostly a Genesect deck. Not necessarily what we think of as a Plasma deck in the truest sense from quote-unquote back in the day. Thundurus EX has a lot to do with what we call a Plasma deck. This concept of recycling energy, powering up, and using other Team Plasma Pokemon in combination. So Thundurus EX powering things up is going to be a lot of the theme here. And part of what's going to make this guy very interesting in this deck is that we are pairing him with the aforementioned Genesect. We're going to run 3 of each. And I know what you might be thinking, well, this is a Genesect deck, this isn't really Forgotten. But using Thundurus and Genesect together is extremely uncommon, and we're going to play Genesect much like we would an older Plasma deck, but with a few other interesting tricks. This is going to be a little bit of setup, a little bit of control, thanks to red signal and whatnot, which can also be very useful against new meta things coming out recently, like Primal Groudon, who is indeed very scared of Genesect EX, who can dispatch Primal Groudon at full health with nothing more than a muscle band attached. So that's where we're going to go with this. And I think you'll really like this, if for no other reason than as something different from the main fare. We are going to run Zapdos, mainly because he can use lightning energies, just like Thundurus can, and he can be a little stally with agility, which is nice, but in a lot of ways he's just an extra Pokemon to kind of give us a little extra muscle for when we need it, for when Thundurus isn't quite going to be doing it. Power Volt is another way we can hit hard when we don't have access to Genesect. Because energy removal can be a thing, and Zapdos can give us a little bit of line of defense, and he can also stall for us, and he's got a cheap retreat and fighting resistance, and I shouldn't have to sell him any more than that. One unusual choice is we're going to have Tropius, because remember, we have access to grass and electricity here. Return is a great way to keep us going, and unlike Tornadus EX, this guy doesn't cough up 2 prizes, nor is he fighting people for plasma energies, and his energy press also hits very hard. Fighting resistance is nice, and he also has the benefit of, as a grass type, hitting Seismitoad EX pretty hard. So this guy can put in a lot of work for us, and that's definitely why we're running him. He's a great Ultra Ball target, which we can do on our first turn, because we should know what our opponent's playing just by looking at their Pokemon in that first turn, so we shouldn't have been Quaking Punched yet. We are going to run 3 copies of Deoxys EX. This guy, of course, mainly just to power our stuff up, but we can always attack with him because we have the Plasma Energies, and of course we have Rainbow Energy, which we can easily sort around with Thundurus EX to power this guy up, which is good for hitting Mewtwo EX, who's still running around. Last but not least, we are running 1 copy of Rizian EX, which rounds out our Pokemon lineup. We're not planning on Emerald Slashing. Thundurus is our means of powering ourselves up. He's a little more versatile than this guy, and has more late-game potential than this guy does. Mainly what this guy is here for is his Verdant Wind, to protect us from status and whatnot, to keep Verbank from being an issue, or any other things like that, or luckily timed lasers with sleep. All that goes away, because between Rainbow Energies and Grass Energies, he's got us covered pretty well. So this guy isn't really meant to attack, although he can Emerald Slash and get some Grass Energies. We do have some basics, but he's not really your ideal starter here. He's more of a, I guess, a cleric support kind of Pokemon. We are running 4 Junipers because we really want to make sure we get our setup as quickly as possible, so obviously that's one of the best support cards ever, so we're clearly going to go with that. And speaking of our early game setup being very important, we are running 4 copies of N for the same reason. Once we start taking knockouts, we'll probably be pretty well set up, so we don't really have to worry about it anymore. So extra N's mid to late in the game won't really matter very much, because we're pretty much on our road to victory at that point. We're running 1 Colress. We try to fill our bench up, but early game this guy's not too useful for us. He can be a versus seeker target, but 1 is enough to have the access without being too much at risk. We're opting for 2 copies of Skyla. She can be pretty darn good, but we do need a lot of different things early game, so we're not going to hit Skyla too very hard in numbers, just the 2. to get specific answers, and we do have some cool Skyla targets in this deck. One copy of Teammates, basically is a Versus Seeker target. Early game you can just discard it however you please to Juniper or Ultra Ball or whatever. But it is a very good way to make comebacks out of nowhere. It's a nice card to hold, and those Versus Seekers, of course, are copies of all your supporters in the discard. We have one copy of Shadow Triad. This can get us back G-Booster. Can also get us back a Plasma Energy, which is pretty cool with your red signal, of course. We're also running one copy of Lysander. Yes, we have red signal, but a lot of times, obviously, we may not be able to set that up, or we need to play energy in other places. Lysander is a good Versus Seeker target. I mean, there's just no end to what Lysander can do. I like to run him even with Genesect for that very reason, to broaden our options. Options are the name of the game here. And last but not least, we are running one copy of Az, or AZ, however you want to call him. And this can be very good. It puts energies in the discard pile for Thundurus, which is great. It denies our opponent knockouts, which is amazing. It can even act as a switch in a tight situation. But basically, like after you G-Booster, let's say, this thing can pick up your Genesect, and your Thundurus will become active. You can replay that Genesect at full health again and start powering him up with Thundurus right away. So Az is definitely a nice utility here in this deck that's worth using. As far as our items go, we're running 20. Our A spec obviously is G-Booster. You know, we could make arguments for Dowsing Machine and Computer Search, but realistically, G-Booster is the way to go. It's just instant knockouts on pretty much everything we're ever going to have to worry about, so yeah, it's just a no-brainer. We're running 2 copies of Ultra Ball. We do have some non-plasma Pokemon we want to get, and more importantly, these can help facilitate getting energies into the discard pile for Thundurus, so that is why we're opting for 2 of those. That said, we do run 2 copies of Team Plasma Ball, because there isn't always a whole lot of stuff we want to discard, so we don't want to hit Ultra Ball too hard, and this is great for just getting those extra copies of Deoxys, thinning the deck, etc. So, they're very good, and they're nice Skyla targets too, of course. Of course. We're running 3 copies of Muscle Band because we're trying to, between Deoxys and this, we're trying to turn everything into like a 2-hit KO experience. That's the idea. 1 hit from Thundurus and 1 hit from Genesect, or hopefully from the same Thundurus, might be able to KO most things under most circumstances. That's kind of our plan, so we're running those. Speaking of ways to facilitate 2-turn knockouts, Frozen City, because other Plasma Pokemon are pretty uncommon in our environment right now, so this is going to help us a great deal. Our opponent, not so much, and we only run 2 non-Plasma Pokemon. One of them is Fearsome EX, which we hope, really, in a lot of games, we're not even going to put any energy on in the first place. And then Tropius will probably only ever get like 1 if we use it at all that game. So Frozen City, an excellent stadium. You can plop it down early game, or use it to override other stadiums to keep your opponent from taking advantage of things like Fighting Stadium or Fairy Garden and whatnot. So that's why we're opting for 3. It's just a great way to get a little bit of extra chip damage off. We're running 3 copies of Versus Seeker. This is all about utility. Early game we pitch it, obviously. Late game, we're running 3 to optimize the chances we'll get it, and be able to make things like critical plays with Az, or Lysander, or Shadow Triad, just whatever we really need to hit we can get. It's about really powering through, and of course it can also be end late game if we're falling behind. We're opting for 2 copies of Switch only, just because a lot of our Pokemon have pretty inexpensive retreats, and putting 1 energy in the discard to switch up to another Pokemon doesn't really hurt necessarily that much when we have Thundurus hanging around. So just the 2 switches, just the 2. Just a good way to get out if we get statused or something and Virizian's not around to help us, if all else fails. We do run 1 Professor's Letter. This is a great Skyla target, and of course on top of that, we run some basic energies, so when we can't find the rainbow energies for colorized energy, we can definitely use a letter to go get it. Now that said, we are running energy retrieval, because we're going to burn energies and your opponent's going to knock them off, and there are a lot of hammers, enough hammers around that it's kind of a thing where we might get into a situation where we desperately need to hit those energies in our discard pile, and this can very quickly ensure that Genesect and or Thundurus have the correct energy they need to get done what needs to be done in the late game. A pretty important Skyla target there. Speaking of Skyla targets, we are running 1 Max Potion for a very similar reason to why we run Az. It just recovers things. We don't care about losing the energies. A great way to deny knockouts to our opponents. Our last item might seem like a bit of a head-scratcher at first, but it's Tool Retriever. This allows us to play our tools down with a little bit more liberality to block Flare Gears, And we can also pick up our opponent's things like Headringer, because they're pretty bad for us. We don't want to see Thundurus get Headringered, obviously. We can use this just to pick it up and quickly replace it with a Muscle Band, or in the case of Genesect, we can use G-Booster. And this also lets us retrieve G-Booster off of one Genesect and play it onto another one, or save it to do other tricks. So this is a pretty important card here. It does a little more work, really, than Startling Megaphone's going to do. Our energy lineup, which I've already pretty much spelled out for the most part for us, is 4 Rainbow Energies. Makes everybody happy, basically, in Thundurus. Gains a lot from that. We're running 4 Plasmas, because it makes Genesect very happy, and can also be used for Thundurus and Zapdos in a pinch if they really need it. And our basic energies are running 2 Lightnings, because we don't really need an excessive amount of Lightning energy. It's really just Thundurus who needs it. So we are running 2, kind of keep... because between that and the Lightning, that's 6, and we have Professor's Letter, etc. Just to kind of keep it from being prized so we can still letter for it if we need to, or energy retrieval. And last, we are running 3 Grass Energies, because that's the one we're going to need a little bit more of because of Genesect's double Grass energy requirement. So, that is the deck. That is Plasma, sort of reimagined, if you will. And so until next time, if you'd like, comment, subscribe, and all that good jazz, and I will see you on my channel with more Pokemon content.